I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight on Martin Luther King Day, Volunteer Day of Service. We have a panel set based on the topic around AmeriCorps and deaf and hard of hearing people's experience in that program. My name is Sam Forshey. I am the moderator for tonight's panel. I want to start us off with a brief description of what AmeriCorps looks like and what's included in that organization. Then we'll dive into about a 45-minute panel with all of our participants and then have a chance for a Q&A afterwards from the audience. That will be the last 15 minutes and we will open it up to discussion from you. So feel free to type in your questions or comments in the chat box and my team members will be feeding those to me during that 15-minute period. Again, before we dive into introductions, I want to take a minute to explain a little bit about AmeriCorps as an organization. So AmeriCorps is a federally based program that was set up in about the 1906, and it was set up for Americans, similar to the international version of Peace Corps, where Americans go non-domestically and serve. This was the counterpart where Americans served domestically for individuals living in poverty or provide service back to the community through education, disaster relief, supporting a variety of different conservation corps and community organizations. There are three main organizations they serve: NCCA, the Senior Volunteer Corps, and one other. Through those three programs, AmeriCorps volunteers serve a variety of different nonprofit and organizations throughout the country. So that's a general synopsis of what that organization does. And now I want to take a moment for introductions. So if the panelists could give your name, what particular AmeriCorps program you were involved with, and we'll go around from there. Should we start with Vanessa? Hi, yes, this is Vanessa. I am from Arizona State, and I've served in 2 terms with the American Conservation Experience, which is a program under AmeriCorps.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mimi. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I served 3 terms with AmeriCorps. First one being CCM, Conservation Corps of Minnesota. Second, WisCorps, which is a conservation corps in Wisconsin. And I've also did an experience with Northwest Youth Corps in Washington State. Hello, everyone. I'm Jojo. I served 2 terms under AmeriCorps. First term was in Minnesota. I was there during the summertime, and for a year and a half, I was working with another organization here in New Mexico, working with deaf and hard of hearing populations in rural areas. So I was mainly serving them.
Jojo, just a heads up, you're freezing a little bit on my end. This is Sam. I'm not sure if everybody else can see you, but make sure to just sign a little bit slower so we catch everything you're saying, all right? Awesome. Just a heads up on that. This is Sam again. So I guess we'll go ahead and dive into the questions for tonight's panel. Of course, as I mentioned, today is Martin Luther King Day of Service. So in relation to that question, what ways are you serving your community? This is Vanessa speaking. I've been involved with a variety of opportunities, including trail maintenance, agricultural and forestry maintenance projects and the like, fencing projects, and I love that type of community service, that hands-on work.
This is Mimi. So I'm assuming you're asking specifically during my time in my terms or now?
More so what community service means to you in this moment.
Well, I think that basically following what my experience with my terms in AmeriCorps, we worked on several projects, conservation projects in each of them, and specifically for improving accessibility needs for people being in outdoor spaces. And so we've worked a lot with natural disaster reliefs. We've worked with giving back to people, and allowing them to reconnect with the outdoors as well. This is Jojo. During my time in AmeriCorps, um, giving back to the community looked like service, whether it be in nature and forest and things like that.
This is Sam. Thank you so much for that. Do we have any favorite stories when you look back on your community service experiences under AmeriCorps? This is Vanessa. I really do love working with the National Park Service and Forestry Service, all of the different opportunities involved with that, to be able to see the different diversity of the outdoors. I remember going to the Grand Canyon on one occasion, which is itself a national park, for trail maintenance purposes. And it was just so beautiful to have that be my office all day, every day during work. It was just such a wonderful experience. It was my first time visiting as well when I went and volunteered there.
This is Mimi. I have countless experiences I could speak of. Really, it's just really been fortunate for me with all of my experiences within AmeriCorps, with Northwest Corps, and all the other corps I've been in. But I've been able to travel to various states and work with a variety of people and groups. So, I've got to work with some headquarters staff and some community organizations as well, and that created opportunity for a lot of support. A lot of organizations also helped us, and also helped providing access for us, whether it comes to having ASL inclusion and ASL interpreters, and also helping us connect more so with the outdoors. A lot of the events or activities that we're involved in, it was my first time doing, which was really amazing to be able to do that, connect with the space community and the people. So Jojo, do you mind repeating the question again?
Yeah, sure. If you have any favorite memories or stories you wanted to share based on your experience.
This is Jojo. Yeah, I would say in Minnesota. That was one memory I have in particular. We were in our camper, and I remember that a lot of folks there were really invested in growing themselves, and so with the campers, a lot of people were feeling like they wanted to give up and wanted to leave, and I was kind of there to help them out and in their experience and try to be motivating to them and let them know that a specific a specific camper that wanted to leave, and I was trying to encourage them to stay. This is Mimi. Yeah, I remember my first core, that was something that happened to me as well.
This is Sam. Sorry, Mimi, what were you saying?
I was just saying that I agree with what Jojo said, specifically when it's your first time experience being in a core. There's a lot of things that you have to get used to and a lot of things to improve upon with it. But within the experience of being outdoors and working hard, there was all of that.
Sam, going back to what Jojo was saying about that 3-month term, that's a long time to be out working.
Yeah, 2 months, almost 3.
These campers were away from their families for that whole time. Wow, I can imagine that had an impact on them.
Yeah, we were, pretty isolated away from people, and we were oftentimes working on projects in different areas. And so sometimes when we would do that, we'll be split up for maybe 2 weeks, two weeks at a time. But we did have a base site that we all usually came back to.
That leads me to my next question with community service in AmeriCorps. How long were your terms? Was it for a full year? Was it during a summer? Jojo, we'll start with you.
While I was in Minnesota Conservation Corps, that happened during the summertime. I think that was about almost 2 to 3 months, that term. But my term in New Mexico, that was for 2 years. And so that partnership in itself, I really enjoyed there at New Mexico School for the Deaf. And this is Mimi. I did serve 3 terms. Um, And I would say on average, each of them were about 2.5 to 3 months. Usually it's from the end of May to August. But I would say will be the experience of all of mine in the three terms that I served. Um,
This is Vanessa. I've served 2 terms, so in total it was about 1 year and a half of my time. This is Sam. So as I mentioned, I am an AmeriCorps Vista, and my term is 1 year of service, and I am two months in with 10 months left, and it's been a fantastic experience. I really look forward to the next 10 months as a Vista. So my next question for the 3 of you, as deaf individuals working in a variety of conservation corps, did you feel that you provided a unique experience, a unique benefit, a deaf gain, if you will, to the communities and the programs you were serving? This is Vanessa. So I worked with the American Conservation Experience, which was primarily hearing volunteers. I was the only deaf or hard of hearing individual in that specific cohort. And I felt like I helped other individuals, specifically hearing individuals, learn about the intricacies and nuances of interacting with deaf and hard of hearing people when it comes to communication, when it comes to maybe some basic signs. They really enjoyed picking up on those. And it was really important for all of us to have that inclusive mindset. And it was important for me in my own experience to educate others in how to interact with other deaf members. So even after my experience, they would know how to do so.
This is Mimi. With my 3 term experience, really, it's really nice to see how much they accommodated us in the space. When we were working on specific projects in specific areas, specifically in Wisconsin and Minnesota, oftentimes we met individuals who had never met other deaf and hard of hearing people before. And so a lot of things were new to when it came to experiencing deaf culture and signing, but we did see a lot of them being really open to learning about our culture and our language. And so when at WISCOR, when they had created the inclusion program, it was really nice to see that the headquarters staff there, they had took on initiative to learn ASL to go ahead to be able to communicate with all of us, which is really nice. And while at CCM, they're much more experienced with working with deaf and hard of hearing people. I think they've been running for about 20 or so years. So they oftentimes took the lead of providing training and classes for people who were coming into the Conservation Corps. And so they did also oftentimes ask me to help with teaching ASL and deaf culture. We did have a youth group, a hearing youth group that would oftentimes meet in the evenings. And so it was really nice for me to be able to work with them and seeing these youth who are really motivated to learn. This is Jojo. For me, my experience was pretty unique. Honestly, I didn't know about AmeriCorps. I knew about Peace Corps, but I didn't know that there was AmeriCorps, something that I can do here at home. And so as I got into, I enjoyed it. And then it came to my second term. And I realized there was different perspectives that were people had when it came to it. Now, the community, the deaf community's perspective, deaf game perspective, um, and as Vanessa mentioned, there was a lot of education that was happening, educating folks about deaf culture, educating people about us because they oftentimes didn't know about us, right? And so that made me just think about how many deaf people are actually knowledgeable of AmeriCorps. Right, there's not many. So we're trying to increase that exposure in numbers and let people know about these programs, right? And not just think that we serve specific environments, but we can be in multiple spaces. And so that's why I feel that AmeriCorps provides.
This is Sam. Any of you want to add to that? Awesome. So I'm so happy all of you have had that AmeriCorps experience, and it seems to be primarily positive. Did you feel like that industry in general is accessible to deaf and hard of hearing individuals?
Let's clarify. Do you mean the AmeriCorps system or do you mean in general?
The community service industry, that field of giving back, one of which being AmeriCorps, do you feel that that itself is accessible?
This is Jojo. I think it depends. Like here in New Mexico, they're already pretty used to the deaf and hard of hearing community. They, really have a system on how things run. But when it comes to AmeriCorps, I would say they oftentimes haven't had experiences working with deaf and hard of hearing individuals. And so a lot of them have questions whether they know how to work with us, how to secure interpreters. So I feel like we should be able to have like this AmeriCorps, gathering of all programs where we can all come together and talk about how can improve services and programs, and also how we can create these places of change, and also just also have that topic of how can we provide interpreters that are accessible, because again these places were oftentimes never accommodated to deaf folks, so now's the time to make that change happen.
This is Vanessa. I completely agree with you there.
Mimi, I also agree with Jojo. But I'd like to add to what Jojo had said. Some of the conservation corps have had experience, with planning and providing accessibility, and having a really good foundation of work with deaf and hard of hearing people, providing ASL access. But I think it just depends on specific projects in different regions, right? So those specific projects in regions might not have the experience, and so I think it's more of a topic of how are they disseminating that information to the different organization projects that they are asking different hard of hearing people to be a part of. So I think that sometimes after we do wrap up our terms, our respective AmeriCorps terms, that there is some improvement that is made with these programs, right? And as you mentioned, there's so many AmeriCorps programs, there's so many resources when it comes to scholarships or work opportunities, or even opportunities for recruiting folks. I think that there is a lot of opportunity to bring in more deaf and hard of hearing people into this space. And I would say maybe in the last 10 years or so, it's been a pretty new idea to have a specific ASL course specific for most of these regions. So I think now that it's something that's growing, but it will take a long time for that to really happen.
This is Sam. Thinking about your experience with AmeriCorps and how that had an impact on your trajectory as personally in your career as well, how did you navigate that?
This is Jojo. As I mentioned, I'm not really familiar of all AmeriCorps programs, but when I joined in New Mexico School for Deaf, seeing the system as they had it, where they really value the LNT philosophy, making sure that we tried not to, litter and whatnot. Um, and secondly, New Mexico School for the Deaf, their partnership with the program, that really had an impact on me because the students lived in rural areas. And oftentimes they didn't have services, didn't have sign language access specifically in their homes. And so that's kind of what led me to having my full-time job. Um, and I've really been enjoying it right now, being a deaf mentor to them. Just me with my core experience. I think there's just been little things that have happened that has impacted my life. There's been skills that I've gained, some hard lessons I've had, learning about communication in general. But I think that in general, there's been a lot of technical skills, life skills that I've learned that have been really valuable and applicable to me in my future. And so in some way that has influenced me to potentially, further my studies and maybe some form of environmental studies, or another way that I can get more education opportunities and work in these spaces. So that's something that I realized I wanted to work on. And I think I do want more core experiences. And so I have the experience I have now, right? But there's definitely more opportunities out there. And just to add, sometimes people don't necessarily need these core experiences to be in the positions that they want, but this is a good step, to consider if this is a good step to consider if it's a field that you do want to get into.
I would say, this is Vanessa speaking, AmeriCorps impacted me in a variety of ways. But I would say overall, there's very limited knowledge about deaf culture within AmeriCorps. I was in the education role, and I would like to see more involvement from the deaf community. There are so many people in this community who have that passion for outdoors. So I would really like to continue to educate AmeriCorps and see more involvement from the deaf community. This is Sam. So I did ask where you guys were from, but I didn't ask where you're currently living and what you're currently doing. Are you in school?
Does Joji mind repeating that again?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask to clarify a clarifying question. I asked you where you are from, but I wanted to know where you're living right now and what you're doing.
It's Mimi. Currently I live in Washington, D.C. I graduated from Gallaudet University in May 2020. And currently I work as a long-term paraprofessional at Kendall Demonstrative, Kendall Demonstrative Elementary School, which we just call Kendall. And so that is where I currently work. I basically provide academic support for the students and also other individuals part of their education and academic team. This is Jojo. I currently live in New Mexico, and I work at New Mexico School for the Deaf as a deaf mentor.
This is Vanessa. I'm currently living in Colorado right now, although I am from Arizona, and I graduated from Arizona State University. And I finished a conservation program there and then moved to Colorado State for graduate level in land management. And I work, let me back up. I work for the Colorado State Park Service and the National Park Service at Rocky Mountain National Park as a ranger. This is Sam. Before this webinar started, I remember you said you had 2 different jobs for the winter and summer seasons. Do you mind explaining a little bit about what those differences look like? Yes, so the seasons change. There's So peak time is during the summer and it's slower during the winter. So park rangers work on different assignments. At Colorado State Park, during the winter time, there's less wildlife, such as birds and geese that have flown south for the winter. But again, there still is work for us to do. It just looks a little different depending on the season. This is Sam. That's really cool. In terms of the relationship with the hearing community, do you feel like there needs to be more of a collaboration between the deaf and hearing communities in terms of the outdoor industry? And how do we get the involvement from both sides for that collaboration? Vanessa, this is Vanessa. I think more diversity of volunteers, specifically from people in the deaf community, more people who are also aware of that community and committing to working together. I think there's a value to that and that diversity.
This is Mimi. I think it's great to have a long-term partnership with these conservation corps and various organizations as well. But it would be nice if all these organizations were able to work together, because sometimes I understand that some corps might no longer exist anymore as they exist anymore, and they oftentimes take the information that they've learned. And so I wish that there was a way for them to share that amongst each other. So I think it would be nice if we were able to provide resources for these organizations, so organizations don't fall through like some do, whether it be funding or providing access for interpreters or resources for interpreters, information on how to serve different hard of hearing communities, and also how to recruit and retain deaf and hard of hearing members in their respective organizations. So I think that's something that we need to work on. It requires a lot of work, especially when it comes to operations development of these programs. So I know that, oftentimes, when we start these programs, they have good intentions, but we do want to make them better over time.
Jojo, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Nope, there was not.
All right, I'll jump to the next question. So in terms of your overall experience with AmeriCorps, what do you feel like was the most impactful or made the most change in you? I feel like we sort of already answered this question. Do you want me to move on? Or excuse me, let me clarify. What was the thing that you think could be changed the most? You think we sort of already answered that? Okay, I'll hop on to the next one. All right, let me look here. Do the three of you have any tips for those who are interested in being involved with AmeriCorps, have that passion, not sure if it's a good fit? What would you say to those people? Any comments, advice, or feedback?
This is Jojo. I would say if they decide to join AmeriCorps, it's an amazing educational experience. You're able to focus on things like forestry and really be able to have an opportunity to take a look at what you like and what you enjoy. But it's really amazing work.
This is Vanessa. My suggestion would be to challenge yourself. Find something that's really going to have an impact on possibly your future dream job or your career, something that's going to really transform you. I think that would be really nice.
And also remember that AmeriCorps is one really big organization that has a lot of smaller organizations under it, whether it be conservation corps or something related to education, health, or whatnot. There's many other avenues avenues and ways you can be connected with AmeriCorps. So it just really depends on what your interest is and how you want to connect. But I would definitely suggest you all to go ahead and try, research, learn what it is these organizations are about, and seeing what they have to offer. Now, I always like to do my research first to see what they have And if there's an option, I like to contact the headquarters staff too to help me out, and they're usually pretty happy to help you out. And so do your research on logistics and seeing if it's a good fit for you, and seeing if with all the information that you had, and if you feel confident, go ahead and apply. But I would say in general, AmeriCorps is really great. This is Jojo. I would say the most important thing to remember is have fun.
I
This is
so agree
Mimi.
with that.
I agree.
Yes. This is Sam. In terms of the application process, do you have any tips about how to navigate that? If you're applying to a specific conservation corps, can you think of anything that would help people who are going through that process? Mimi?
This is Mimi. So for specifically with conservation corps, I would love to mention first, do your research, as I mentioned, right? Contact folks as you need to, see what they have to offer, see what they can provide you with, and also seeing, what transportation looks like. Will there be any funds that you will have to, pay yourself out of pocket? Is it something that they'll be covering for you? And even if you don't have any experience, go ahead and apply. Bring your resume, or even consider how this could be something you can add to your resume. They'll also always keep in contact with you. So in addition to that, I also would suggest being well prepared well in advance. And if you are traveling to a new state, be knowledgeable of what gear that you'll need to bring with you, what to bring and what not to bring, and also double checking that this is something that you will be able to bring with you in your luggage too.
Anyone want to add?
Jojo, I'm thinking.
Go ahead, Vanessa. Oh, sorry. This is Sam. Let's say this assignment is happening last minute. For my experience as a Vista, I work full time. And so sometimes over the course of 1 year, I have a lot of time to adapt to the new environment that I'm in. But for those who work maybe 2 or 3 months out in the community at a deaf school or at a church or a public school, maybe they feel like there's shorter time. Maybe they could stay over the weekend, right?
Just Mimi. So oftentimes when it comes to longer term AmeriCorps, or just in general when applying, I would oftentimes ask, what is the commitment that is required, or even what opportunities are there afterwards. Sometimes you also have to think about backup plans too. If you do have a commitment that's 2 to 3 months, what things do you have set up to pay for your rent and other things that you have at home? And so this probably is a really good opportunity for maybe like high school students who have time off in the summertime. They have less responsibility, or even before they go off to college, and this would probably be a good experience for them.
Yeah, I'd say that's a great opportunity for high school students to take advantage of that.
This made me, yeah, of course, like if you don't want to stay home and be bored, it's a great place to go.
Why not be outside during the summertime, right? Vanessa, did I see that you wanted to add something? Oh, I've forgotten. It's fine. If at any time you think of it and want to add, please feel free to jump in. So I think we're going to go ahead and open it up to the audience for the Q&A portion. There have been some questions posted in the chat. So if you want to just leave it there and we will deliver the question, or you can pop up on video or audio and deliver your question in person. I'll wait a few moments to see if there's anybody queued up or feeling the courage to be the first to ask the question. And if not, I'll wait and we will start the questions in the chat soon. I think I'm going to jump in with my own personal question. What type of work projects were you involved in that you really enjoyed? Was it rowing? Was it construction projects? Do you mind repeating that? I'm sorry. Sorry, I phrased it a little confusing. What were your favorite projects that you were a part of? What did you enjoy the most? Was it rock climbing? Was it canoeing? Was it construction?
So you mean in terms of recreation? Okay, that's maybe speaking. So
Yes.
really, I liked any of the outdoor activities, whether it was kayaking or hiking. Um, yeah, just really different things that I enjoyed them all. This is Jojo. In Minnesota, there was a lot of hiking that we did out in nature. Sorry, pets bugging me. But we hiked, we swam. There was a lot of different activities. But here in New Mexico, it was really nice to see opportunities to explore different regions. There's a lot of national parks that we get to explore, or just really unique spaces in New Mexico. And so, even in small towns, there was often things that we were able to do. So, when I was not working, I would go do that when I can.
This is Vanessa. I would say my favorite recreational activity would be backcountry backpacking out in the Grand Canyon. We were there for about 2 weeks, backcountry backpacking without access to running water and showers. We would have our food parachuted down to us. It was a really interesting experience. I really enjoyed it.
This made me, I'd like to add, with each of my 3 AmeriCorps that I've been in, um, I've had, experienced various recreational experiences, whether, like I mentioned, hiking and kayaking, but it really just depended on the place itself. When I was in Northwest, we traveled between 5 different islands. And so in each of those islands, we were able to explore the city and meet with the local people there. And talk to various people who worked in National Park Services and worked in the mountains. And that was the same thing that I experienced when I was working with CCM too.
Did you travel to the different islands for recreation or work sites or both?
It was actually both. Once we were done with work on specific island in the evening times, we had extra time to, just go into town. And or with certain islands, there was also specific destinations that we were able to go to. And sometimes this local town was hosting events. There was one instance where there was a parade that we were able to go to. When I was in Wisconsin, they had a strawberry fair that we were able to go to. Of course, this is pre-COVID, right? So this is a lot more interactive and much more people facing. But usually there was things like after training and stuff we did all day, we were able to enjoy ourselves in the evening, whether we kayaking, swimming, or going to the parks. But when I was in Washington State or Wisconsin, our staff that was working with us oftentimes were treated us to these outings.
That's so cool. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the questions we have from the audience.
Mhm.
And again, we still have the option if you want to pop up on video and do it face to
Yeah,
face.
I'm just not.
And we have interpreters ready to interpret for you. So let's see. My first question here says, What was the transition between AmeriCorps finishing and going back into the real world like for the three of you?
So this is Jojo. There's really not that much difference. I would say the one thing is that definitely struggled with AmeriCorps' phone center when it came to transferring over my information and contacting them. So it was a lot of back and forth and took a while for it to be resolved. But the physical portion of it, there was really no adjustment needed. It was more so the the paperwork part that was the most challenging.
This is Vanessa. I think networking, that transition was the hardest. And I think networking with people in AmeriCorps for the transition afterwards is helpful.
This is Mimi. I think that with the summer course I was in, it wasn't really that tough. Specifically when I was in undergrad, a little bit more when after undergrad, and so it was harder doing transitioning when I was out of school. And so the one thing that I struggled with was contacting AmeriCorps when it came to the scholarships that they're providing and being able to apply that to uh, my funds at Gallaudet. And so they also did help with also my transition and helping and looking for work.
We have another question here. As a member of the AmeriCorps team, was it about half and half, deaf and hearing? And how did you handle the interpreters in that situation? Was it the specific AmeriCorps affiliate program that paid for the interpreter services? Was it AmeriCorps as a whole? And which specific programs around the nation really provide that? Or does AmeriCorps on a national level gather together and request compensation?
This is Jojo. They should. As of right now, I don't know. Unless someone else here knows, that would be great if you could share that with us. But no, of course, there are different partnerships in different organizations, but in terms of how to address, and work with deaf people, I think that's something that we need to work on more, especially when it comes to funding, which is oftentimes a big issue when it comes to pay interpreters. If we're going to pay them, where is that funding coming from? And so I think that's something that we need to be able to find and pull together as resources on how to provide and pay for interpreters. But if that's not something available, it's something that needs to be created.
If I can add.
This is Mimi. I agree. There should be something under AmeriCorps specifically, or within the core networks, where they should provide some form of funding for interpreters. And some conservation corps already are familiar with working with deaf and hard of hearing individuals, so they know about providing ASL interpreter access. But it's more so, like when, let's say, if an ASL inclusion group, falls through or is no longer running, how are they making sure that other organizations in their general area are also using and knowledgeable of interpreters? So I do think that that is a bigger problem. And I do think that they need to find a way, whether it be an agency or some form of federal support, or a grant that can be there to support and cover the costs for interpreters, and also allowing for there to be a great experience for those in these ASL inclusion programs. I know it is something that can be tough, but I don't want people to feel like that they should give up on the efforts when it comes to that.
This is Sam. And to add what to Mimi said, one big issue we have organizations often talk about disability first, but oftentimes they don't end up funding interpreter services. And the deaf and hard of hearing volunteers have to subsist without it, except for the events where they so happen to provide interpreters, but it's not on a consistent basis. So again, and the funding, it doesn't happen up front, it happens on the back end. And so making it accessible to provide interpreters is harder. Sometimes providing interpreters and getting access to them is easy, and sometimes it's not. It really depends.
I think it also depends on what are the long-term goals and how are they trying to support this in the future. Is this something that you're expecting to continue for years on out? If so, how are you planning for that?
I'll go ahead and jump to the next question, which asks, how are you placed as an AmeriCorps volunteer? What factors are considered in location and project placement? What does that process look like?
This is Mimi. It really just depends. If you look at the job description and application, there is oftentimes organizations that are already set in a specific area or region or place that require, that have their own projects and funding. So again, this goes back to researching. And so if you're going to apply to somewhere, look into that and see where exactly you could be placed. Again, each organization varies on how they run and what they do. And so the jobs aren't all the same. It really just depends on what is being covered and funded. Jojo. This is Jojo. For Minnesota, I'm not really sure how they decided placement, but I do know that oftentimes they would work with other staff who oftentimes were interpreters. And so we would oftentimes have a mix of hearing and deaf campers. And the decision was oftentimes based off of our personality, where we would assign folks. And usually we would assess that, make that assessment during the interview and intake process, asking the campers what they like, what they don't like, and also making further observations during training and orientation is when we would go ahead and make those placement assignments. That is something similar here as well.
You froze for a second there, Jojo. Okay, you're back now.
Here in School for Deaf in southern New Mexico.
Many work sites that the campers actually go to work at.
So this in Wisconsin and Conservation Corps, for example, when I applied for the ASL inclusion program, it was either for young adults or youth group. So when I had came in, their organization was already, had the projects worked out and what region that they would be, folks would be placed in. So the organization I had already had set that up, and that's what I'm familiar with.
Vanessa, did you want to add anything? No, I'm okay. All right, let's look at the next question here. We'll do one more. When the volunteer's term with AmeriCorps is finished, who takes over the project in the aftermath? Is there a new conservation corps that takes over? Is it a new cohort? sorry, let me back up and repeat the question. It was a little convoluted. Okay, so when the project, the volunteer project is completed, when the next group comes and steps in, do they continue with that project or do they start on with a new one? Vanessa is saying it really depends on the type of project.
It also depends on each organization. Like for me, when I was Northwest Youth Corps in Washington State, in Wisconsin, and also in Minnesota, each state's project was dependent on the season. So when it came to, with their fall terms, they had different projects for that specific cohort. So it depended on what the project was, who and when you were hired, and in what region you'll be working on, and also if that was a long-term project that you'll be assigned to, or if you will be working on several projects. So that was also, had the potential to change every year, because the directors and other folks and staff can change, but they oftentimes would take the time to prepare ahead of time what they would be doing, and also contacting, working with other organizations as well to try to see what they can do together to work on projects.
Anyone want to add to that? All right, I'm going to go ahead and circle back. Like I said, we have one last question. Do you have any examples where you were really denied access to interpreters because of funding reasons or others? This is Vanessa. Oftentimes, the interpreters were provided through agencies, but all interpreters are not made for the outdoor field, right? It's important that we had the right interpreter under the right agency. Some don't have any AmeriCorps experience in the past. And so it really depends on the agency that's being used. It's important to find the right entity that can supply interpreters for the project. And that's the most challenging part. When I was on a work site for 2 weeks, there was a time where I didn't have an interpreter outdoors for 2 weeks at a time, and that was really difficult. So, but again, there are always resources out there.
This is Jojo. At New Mexico School for the Deaf, and with our partnership with AmeriCorps, they're oftentimes responsible for a few different tasks, and which included providing interpreters. And they often said, they did contact agencies and ask them to provide interpreters, but the interpreters would never show up. And so we already had that feeling that would happen. But we would oftentimes ask, the schools provide interpreters just in case if the agency interpreters didn't come, which was the case, and it continued for 2 years. And so I don't know if it was a contract issue, or even if we should include that to our contract about how the use of our interpreters would be like within their program, but that is a service that needs to be discussed. This is Mimi. I'm trying to remember my first time with Corps. They had already had everything set up when it came to interpreters and training them in advance prior to our arrival. So we did have interpreters for the first 2 weeks for our training. And there was oftentimes during our trainings or on a weekly basis, we were able to have interpreters come in every once in a while. And it was nice for them, nice to have access for that, specifically in Minnesota. During the time that we were training. And so whenever it was something new or new information that was being discussed or taught, of course, we would have interpreters assigned, but there would be times interpreters were sick or something would come up, and we would, this consistent interpreters that we did have, we would have to switch them out and get someone new. But for our training, we did have interpreters at time, but they oftentimes weren't that consistent. For Northwest Youth Corps, we did have one crew member who is actually who was interpreter and was willing to interpret for us the entire 8 weeks. Kudos to him for doing that. But when it comes to accessibility, we did have that. But for CCM, we did oftentimes go without interpreters for a long period of time, which was an interesting experience. Me particularly being a hard of hearing person who uses various ways of communication, whether it be through signing or hearing. But there was times when it came to certain terms, I was trying to catch and ask for clarification. And so there was that came up as well.
All right, we are at 8:08, so I think it's time to wrap up. I want to thank all of our panelists for everything that you said tonight. Thank you so much. And last thing before we close is Soul Fest, hosted by CorpsTHAT, is doing Soul Fest is our fundraiser to give back to the deaf community and for the WISC Conservation Corps Summer Project. And this fundraiser ends tonight at midnight. Thank you to all of those who have given, and please make a donation if you're interested to support that Conservation Corps. Thank you so much. Also, an FYI, if you have any more questions, please contact CorpsTHAT or please contact the email in the chat. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Thank you.